All right. Well, thanks for joining us on this cold Friday afternoon. This is the Active Transportation Alliance City Advocacy Call, and this is our first one of 2024. So excited to get started doing this important work. I'm going to drop a couple of ground rules in the chat, but feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat as well. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Feel free to ask questions using the chat or the raise the hand feature at any time. We also want to keep the conversation respectful, avoid victim blaming, speculation, and inflammatory language. If you have any other kind of ground rules you want to add, feel free to do so. Otherwise, feel free to throw in your name, what community area you're coming from, and if you're affiliated with any groups in the chat, just so everybody knows who's in the room. So we have kind of a stacked agenda today, pretty exciting. We have two special guest speakers. We have John Greenfield of Streets Blog Chicago, who, as you can already see up on the screen, is going to share out about his Bike Lane Week coverage from the end of the year, showing off all the new cycling facilities throughout the city. And then we have Alex Nelson of Better Streets Chicago, who's going to be giving us the latest on the Plowed the Sidewalks campaign. And then you'll hear a couple of updates from Active Transportation Line staff on some walking, biking, and transit issues. And then we'll leave time if any of you all have announcements, questions of your own. We'll take some questions after each of our speakers as well. So thanks everybody for dropping those intros in the chat. Love to see people tuning in from all parts of the city. We've got some Commuters Take Action folks, Equiticity, awesome, Bike Grid Now, welcome. Okay, I think at this point we can let John take it away and dive into his presentation.
All right, thanks a lot, Julia. Well, before I get started here, I'd just like to give a shout out to the Active Transportation Alliance. The organization has been around for a long time. You know, it was formerly the Chicagoland Bike Federation. I did an internship there, man, it was like 27 years ago in 1996 when I was a young person. So they really helped launch my bike advocacy career. I think one really important thing that Active Trans does is they sort of act like the glue that holds together all the smaller advocacy organizations. You know, I'm thinking we're talking about bikes today. So like, you know, some of the great bike organizations that are around nowadays, organizations that handle biking include Chicago Bike Grid Now, Better Streets Chicago, Bike Lane Uprising, to raise a few. I'm sure I'm leaving some out. But I think Streets Blog Chicago is part of that pie. And I think Active Trans does a really good job of unifying people around issues. So thanks for having them invite me to talk about Chicago Bike Lane Week, which was a series we did on Streets Blog Chicago in 2023. And there were a couple of reasons why I did this series, visiting all the bike lanes that were built or upgraded in Chicago in 2023. One of them was just that the city of Chicago, you know, on Streets Blog, we've done a lot of razzing the city in past years. You know, I don't think bike lane installation went that quickly under the last administration. But I think 23 turned out to be a really good year. I think former Transportation Commissioner Gia Biaggi deserves some credit for that, because the things that happened in 23 when she left the department I'm sure she had a big role in planning those. So anyway, the CDOT bike staff, bike and pedestrian staff did a great job in 2023, comparatively speaking. I mean, you know, this is in Amsterdam, but they built 55 miles of new bikeways in Chicago this year. And they installed a lot of protected bike lanes. So that's a great thing. You know, like on this picture, you're looking at an existing bike lane on Jackson Boulevard in Columbus Park in Austin, which was formerly just flexible plastic posts, but now has concrete curbs, which makes it a lot safer. And I think part of the reason that CDOT did a good job of upgrading bike lanes and adding new concrete protected bike lanes this year was there was a lot of pressure from organizations. Particularly Chicago Bike Grid now has really been pushing hard for new protected bike lanes and new neighborhood greenways, which are low stress side street bike routes. So I think CDOT really listened. So that's a good thing. Another reason I felt like doing this particular project, as you might see right now, I have an eye patch, and that is not because it's National Talk Like a Pirate Day. It's because back in April 2023, I was doing a bike tour in southern Illinois, near Carbondale, the college town, when someone drove by in a pickup truck with some unsecured irrigation pipe and accidentally whacked me in the back of the head with this big plastic pipe. I was knocked off my bike. I hit my eye on the ground, had some other issues. I was in the hospital for about a month. I'm doing great now, but I've still got some eye issues to fix that hopefully I'll be making some progress on this month. But anyway, when I did this, I think because I was recovering from those injuries, I didn't visit as much of the city this year as I normally would have. So this project, Bike Lane Week, encouraged me to go all over the city, checking out all these good new bike lanes. So this was a fun project for me, and it got me to see more of the city. So you can see now this is a map that Streets Blog created that shows you all the bike lanes that were installed in 2023. At the time we did this, CDOT didn't really have a map like this. And I think part of the reason they didn't do a map like this one is that it shows that the distribution of bike lanes in Chicago this year was not particularly equitable. It's mostly on the north side and on the west side. Not so much on the south side or the southeast side this year. The fact that there's so much on the west side, which is largely lower income communities of color, reflects that CDOT in the past has been doing a project to try to get more neighborhood people, particularly in underserved neighborhoods, to help plan bikeways. That started out on the northwest side in the Belmont-Craigan community, which has been very active with that. The Northwest Center has put in a lot of input about where bike lanes should go. So that's a great project. And so they also did that in neighborhoods like North Lawndale, where Advocacy is involved, the Mobility Justice Group. And so far, they hadn't done that much of that on the far south side, on the south side. I know they've been working with We Keep You Rolling, the bike advocacy group in the Riverdale community, which is around here on the far south side. So we're starting to see some stuff come in on the far south side, but they've been doing more of that kind of outreach this past year. So in the next year, I think we're going to see a lot more bikeways and neighborhoods on the mid-south side, like Brighton Park, McKinley Park, and Gage Park. So that's great. So anyway, the way I did this project is for the first few days, I took the red line down to 95th Street, and then I went and rode around the far south side and the mid-south side. So let's take a look at some of the places I visited there. Well, actually, this particular page is from the fifth article I did on this project. So this actually covers a pretty good swath of the city. Here's the route I took, if you can see this. This was about a 37-mile route I did all by bike, going from my home in Uptown to the near northwest side, to the west side, to the near south side, and then back up through the north side. And, that really showed you diverse neighborhoods and a lot of different interesting setups. Here's an example of a badly maintained bike lane that is, it's got the concrete protection. This is on Roscoe near Western, but unfortunately someone has swept leaves in here. We'll talk about that more later. So here we're going through Logan Square. This is in Hermosa on the near northwest side. This is what's called a neighborhood greenway. What I was talking about earlier, one of the low stress neighborhood streets. And what's good about these kind of streets is this is a contraflow bike lane. So this was previously a one-way southbound street, but the contraflow bike lane gives you permission to ride against traffic on the bikeway. And it also alerts drivers that there will be bike riders going that direction, so it makes it safer. So I think that's a good trend that the city has been doing in recent years. Here we are in Austin. I think this is Menard Street going under the Blue Line tracks. I like this photo. I think it's sort of a visually interesting photo. But after I posted this, I got a lot of flack from commenters online who noted that like it's not a protected bike lane and the position is kind of weird, that this is in some ways not the best designed bike lane. So what we're seeing nowadays is people really want physically protected bike lanes. This is on Homan Avenue in Garfield Park. And you can see there's this nice concrete protection. If you're biking on this, you really don't have to worry much about getting struck by a driver. So this is a good kind of bike lane for what we call interested but concerned cyclists. Now, someone like me, I worked as a bike messenger for 6 years in Chicago. I would call myself what they call a strong and confident cyclist. Like if I'm riding in heavy traffic, if I'm riding on a street without a bike lane, if I have to ride in what they call a door zone bike lane, which is within a few feet of opening car doors, I know how to do that. I've worked in heavy traffic before. But one thing I try to keep in mind as a bike reporter is that most Chicagoans do not feel that way. Most Chicagoans do not feel confident sharing the road with traffic, let alone fast moving traffic, reckless drivers, negligent drivers, intoxicated drivers. So they want physical protection. And, considering what happened to me, maybe I should be more cautious than I am. But at any rate, CDOT has gotten the message, thanks to groups like Chicago Bike Grid Now, that they are trying to install protected bike lanes whenever they can. This is by Garfield Park. This is a little video of riding the Garfield protected bike lane that's near the Gold Dome. There are some raised crosswalks in this section. It goes up by the Garfield Park Conservatory. So you can kind of see what's going on here. Here is a bike lane by the Garfield Park Conservatory and some protected bike lanes in North Lawndale and on Lake Street. Here we are by UIC. This is on Polk Street. I think this is a very nice protected bike lane on both sides of the street. I know there was a little bit of pushback when the First Lady visited, I think it was last week. There was some security detail for the First Lady who were parked in these lanes. People were posting photos of that. So, I understand that it's important to keep the First Lady safe, but we also should keep in mind that we shouldn't be obstructing bike lanes to do that if possible. All right. Here's Jackson Boulevard heading into the West Loop. There's the Sears Tower. And this is a very nice setup where CDOT upgraded the quality of the bike lane here, put in some concrete protection. Here, now Dearborn Bike Lane was the two-way protected bike lane in the Loop and South Loop. Has been a facility that a lot of people like for a long time. It goes in both directions. This year, they started extending it north. So this is in the River North, which is a nightlife district north of the river, where there's a lot of hectic driving in that area. There's a lot of people. There have been a lot of nasty pedestrian crashes. I'm sure there have been some bicyclists injured in River North too. So they added some concrete protection here, which is a big help. And as you can see, it also makes things better for pedestrians because they've got an island here that shortens the crossing distance for them as they cross Dearborn. And here we are continuing north on Dearborn where they've extended the lane. And here we are. This was sort of like the first work done on the Dickens Greenway, which is a nice neighborhood greenway that goes from Claiborne Avenue to Lincoln Park. A little bit of post-protected bike lane that they put on Racine to connect with Dickens. All right, so that's some of the stuff that I saw on the last day of Bike Lane Week. Just a couple of things I learned from this. I want to thank the CDOT staff. I think they worked really hard this year. I hope they get to take a vacation next month because you can't build bike lanes in Chicago when the weather's really cold. But a couple of things I found from visiting is that we really need a more connected bikeway system. We really need to make sure that when you're giving someone directions on how to bike somewhere safely and low stress, it's not really complicated. Like near where I live in Uptown, there's a great little section of a protected bike lane on Clark Street from Montrose to Irving Park that was built this year, concrete protected. But the issue is like, how much good does a half-mile protected bike lane actually do? Like, we want our protected bike lanes to actually cover a long distance going from destinations that people want and need to visit. So I know that Alderman Matt Martin would like to extend that protected bike lane north into Uptown, going further north on Clark from Montrose to Foster. So let's hope that happens. One more encouraging thing that's happened recently is the city of Chicago has introduced some miniature snow plows. So they seem to be doing a much better job with snow clearance this year from what I've seen so far. So let's see more of that, because if you're building protected bike lanes and they're full of garbage or broken glass or snow or leaves, you might as well be riding somewhere where there aren't bike lanes. So if the city is going to get serious about building a network of connected, protected bike lanes, it's great that they're starting to do a better job of maintaining them. All right, well, that pretty much is a summary of what we did with Bike Lane Week, and it was definitely a great learning experience for me. So thanks for letting me discuss it here.
Thanks so much, John. I want to open the floor to any questions.
I know one thing that's been really controversial in the past week or so is the Dickens Greenway. So if anybody wants to talk about that, I'm able to it. That's Dickens Avenue, 2100 North, which goes from Clybourne Avenue to the Lincoln Park Zoo. I think it's a great route.
Mm-hmm.
But I know a lot of the neighbors are up in arms about it. So Streets Blog, one of our roles is to try to, like, when people are writing articles or op-eds or doing news stories that don't really tell the true story of new bike ways, we try to debunk them. So that's kind of what we've been doing with Dickens this week.
And persistently over the years as that project has been.
I mean, a way I like to think of it is like, I think Active Trans is very good at, I think Alex Perez, your advocacy manager, did a great job in a recent Tribune article about the Dickens Greenway, talking about how you folks, your job is to kind of like be ambassadors for new safe streets infrastructure, and just explain to people why these things are good for the community, why they're good for public health, the environment, traffic congestion, equity. So you guys play sort of a more encouraging role than this. I think that Streets Blog, not just Streets Blog Chicago, but the whole nationwide network, our role is like, we can take the gloves off a little bit and get a little more critical of people who are saying untrue things about safe streets infrastructure.
We did have one question pop up in the chat, which asks, did you notice differences in driver behavior based on the different infrastructure or kinds of lanes?
Well, it certainly makes a big difference whether you're biking on a protected bike lane, a physically protected bike lane, particularly one that has concrete curbing or a concrete island next to it. I mean, that makes it really challenging for drivers to, misuse the bike lane. Whereas when you have regular, what's called door zone bike lanes, which are just the two striped lines to the left of the parked cars, it's a lot easier for people to use those for double parking or, Lyft or Uber drivers to drop off passengers. Someone's running into a store to buy something and they just want to double park there. And, you can have an argument about whether or not that's good behavior by the driver. But the fact is, if there's a concrete protected bike lane, it makes it a lot harder for them to do that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And then I see we have a raised hand from Ethan. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hey everyone, and hey John. I just heard you mentioned things like Alderman Martin wanted to extend the Clark Street bike lanes, Dickens connecting to Clybourne, et cetera. And I just wanted to sort of plug CDOT's economic mobility surveys. So there's 3 surveys that are kind of going around both for residents and business owners about, I think it's Clark, Milwaukee, and Clybourne. And they're essentially asking, like, do you feel safe on these roads? And what are the economic impacts to maybe, say, removing parking to put in a protected bike lane? I think these surveys, especially like the one on Clark, like you mentioned, I think those are going to be absolutely huge going forward because, a big factor in removing parking to make bike lanes is businesses see or there's this perception that they'll lose business. And so one of the things that I would recommend is if you guys can share those surveys out more widely so that people can share both their experiences and also sell the impacts of these kinds of projects on commercial corridors, because that's a really important piece of getting a protected bike lane network is you have to get connect things to where people want to go. And CDOT's trying to make the case to businesses who typically oppose these kinds of projects that no, this won't actually be bad for your business.
Yeah, I noticed that there was one of those going around for Andersonville today. So we'll definitely promote that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's also one for Milwaukee and another for Clybourne. I think there's 3 identical surveys, but addressing the different corridors.
Ethan, if you happen to have the links to those other 2 in the chat, I just dropped the Clark Street one, please do post them in the chat is what I mean.
Yeah, I'll track them down.
Thank you so much.
Oh, by the way, one thing I should mention is that we are doing our fundraising drive for Streets Block Chicago right now. We are a nonprofit organization and we are paywall free. So I'll put something in the chat with a link in case anyone would like to make a contribution. That would be a big help. Thanks.
And then we just have one last question in the chat, John. How do you think we could best message the expansion of South Side protected bike lanes that both promote safety for all users and assuage fears of gentrification, et cetera, from alders?
Well, I think CDOT has a good strategy in the neighborhood bike networks program, where they are doing additional outreach in South and West Side communities of color to try to spread the word that these bikeways are intended for local people, and that the Department of Transportation really wants to listen to, what routes are important to local people. For example, on the west side in Little Village, southwest side, they created some good bikeway networks to some good neighborhood greenway routes that help connect people to local parks like La Villita Park. I know they did a 2-way greenway. So that was probably something that people really asked for, is like, look, this is where residents and particularly kids really want to be able to bike, is on side streets. Can you give us a safe way to do that to access this beautiful new park, La Villita Park? So I think if there are more of those kind of outreach programs, the neighborhood bike network programs, that will help get more local folks on board with this.
Great. And one last question, they keep coming in. Is there any hope for protected or off-street bike lanes on Milwaukee in Logan Square, or is it simply a done deal at this point?
Are there any hopes for off-street protected bike lanes in Logan Square?
Yes.
I mean, there are protected bike lanes in Logan Square. Are they talking about
on Milwaukee
specifically? What's that?
On Milwaukee specifically?
Well,
because like there's protected before that, and they're working on protected after that. But then what I had heard was the decision with the alder was, okay, we made a compromise because of other housing development and what the business people want. We removed parking elsewhere, so we're not removing parking along Milwaukee.
John, I think
they haven't
Liz
started construction yet, right?
Yeah, I think Liz is referring to the Logan Square project from 2018 that they decided they're going to do dash lanes only between Logan Square Circle and Belmont. And that there was an article that came out in the fall that basically said we're not going to revisit this design, even though a lot of people want protected bike lanes.
Well, yeah, I remember there was some conversation about that. I mean, that's a pretty retail dense area north of the Logan Square Circle, heading northwest into Avondale. And I guess streets wide, we were a little disappointed with the local alderperson's decision on that. Carlos Ramirez Rosa for the 35th Ward, that we thought he should have been a little stronger about that. On the other hand, he gets a lot of credit for what he's done on Belmont this year with CDOT, that they built some very good protected bike lanes west of Western Avenue until the Blue Line station at Kimball Avenue, that I know a lot of local people are mad about because they feel it's having a bad effect on driving, but it's definitely having a great effect on biking and walking and accessing the transit station. It's much safer to ride under the Metro tracks and under the Kennedy Expressway. All right, but anyway, this is news to me that there is currently controversy going on about the Milwaukee Avenue bike lanes north of the Circle, northwest. So I will look into that. I mean, one big thing that's happening is they're about to revamp the Circle itself and add a new pedestrian plaza there. So that's great news. But yeah, we really do need protected bike lanes on all of Milwaukee Avenue because it is Chicago's busiest biking street. And there have been way too many deaths on Milwaukee Avenue, cyclists being fatally struck by drivers. So we need to stop that from happening. So yeah, it might be worth checking in with Alderperson Rosa again and see what his point of view is on this issue.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John. And thanks everyone for the lively questions and conversation. We really appreciate all of your coverage and work, and we're so glad you're making a good recovery from your crash. So folks, make sure to check out the Bike Lane Week coverage and donate if you are able to Streets Blog.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks. All right, so next we're going to hear from Alex Nelson, who is joining us from Better Streets Chicago, who has been their campaign lead on Plow the Sidewalks. And before we hand it over to Alex, John, I'm just going to ask you if you're able to stop sharing your screen.
All right, just a sec.
Sure thing. Thank you. Great. Perfect. All right, Alex, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us, Julia. Thrilled to be able to provide this update. I do not have a fancy presentation today, so you guys just get to look at my face or whatever else you have up on your screens at the moment. So thanks for your patience on that. But yeah, so my understanding is that you folks were last given a brief update on Plow the Sidewalks in November, and we've actually had some substantive changes since then. So the ordinance for a working group was passed last spring in May, and that's really all the ordinance allowed for, was like saying that the Committee on Pedestrian and Traffic Safety, Departments of Streets and Sanitation, Department of Transportation, and the mayor's office, as well as community advocates, had to sit in a room together several times over the course of a year to actually develop a pilot proposal, which would then come back to city council this spring, and like they would then vote on it to actualize it. And so that's what we're doing right now. We are actually in the throes of designing a pilot. So we did have this working group kickoff. There's been a ton of internal city meetings, by the way, independent of this, but we had the full working group kickoff. I think it was in late November, or I think it was actually in early December. Jim Merrill was part of it. Thank you so much for joining us, Jim. And we really sat in a room and we presented our vision for what we had thought pilot zones could look like. We got some feedback from others in the room. And I will say Departments of Streets and Sanitation, Commissioner Cole Stollard is working with us in good faith. He is very interested in seeing this program happen and seeing it happen and seeing it being done well. He wants it to succeed. So where we settled after some give and take over what zones could look like and what would make the most sense, and some of his concerns about having zones that were too big and therefore unfeasible, is we ultimately landed on 4 zones at 1.5 square miles each, and they're distributed throughout the city. So we have a north side zone, a west side zone, a southwest side zone, and a far south zone. I do not have the actual boundaries with me today because we are still waiting on the feedback from the city to actually finalize those zones, but hopefully on the next ATA call, we will be able to show you exactly where those zones are. But generally speaking, they're in Uptown between Marine Drive and Damon, and I think the boundaries are like Foster and Montrose or something like that. So that one was chosen because Uptown has, in terms of urban form, it's very dense, and it has just high rises and things you need to navigate like that, as well as a really strong disability and poverty or income index, meaning that they reflect a wide variety of people of different strata from the city of Chicago. We have a west side zone, southwest side, and far south side. Each zone encompasses at least or touches at least 4 wards. So we're getting in one zone touches 5. So we'll be 17 alders are going to see at least some impact of this pilot from when it's brought to fruition, which we think will help with the sell of it down the road. And then what we're going to ask for is automatic triggers for expansion. So basically the idea is like pilot year 1 goes well, let's expand these zones and or add new zones or some combination of the two so we can get more area covered and also understand better how the costs impact change when we add in more area. I'm a big believer in the Costco theory of approach, the idea being like the cost of doing in 1 mile is higher if you're just doing a few piecemeal pieces, and will go down the cost per square mile as you add in a more comprehensive blanket type coverage. So yeah, we're in a really, really strong place. I want to give a shout outs to Alderman Laspada, who's the head of the Committee on Pedestrian and Traffic Safety, who's really been taking a lead role in navigating this process. And he's super communicative, super helpful. We're so grateful that he's in our corner and that he's been helping us lead this process. Also, again, shout out to Gil Villegas, who was the first alder to truly take this seriously and decide like this needed to be a policy. He's still at the table with us. And, you know, again, like we would not be where we are if it wasn't for him genuinely having a real interest in this. So yeah, you know, it's a shame that I'm not able to show you folks the zones today. But again, that's something we can look forward to for the next call. But yeah, overall, super strong position with where we're at with the city, waiting to hear feedback from them. Really excited about these 4 pilot zones. We think we've got a really strong, as I said, you know, we've got 17 alders that are going to see their wards reflected in these zones, some more than others. Some it's just a couple blocks, some it's like, oh, this covers a substantive amount. But again, we're really hopeful that that gives us a huge political lift. And when we designed the zones, our focus was, and I mentioned this a little bit with the north side zone, was urban form, but also areas with tremendously high populations with disability, kids under 5, and who meet the hardship index, because those are often the areas where folks have genuine prohibitions to being able to shovel or clear their own sidewalks. So yeah, with that, I think just things to look out that are coming down the road. You know, there's going to be a big activist push this spring, you know, call your alders, email your alders, tell them you want to see this through. We've been doing that for the past couple of years. There's going to be yet another push, so please be mindful of that. When we have the date for the city council meeting, there's the committee hearing and the city council meeting, we'll be sure to boost that on Better Street Chicago's social and newsletter, because we'd love to have a turnout for public comment. But yeah, we're in a good place, and it's just continuing to push and continuing to move forward. So yeah, if there are any other questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks so much, Alex, for all of your leadership, you and all the folks involved in the campaign. It's really been a tremendous volunteer-led, for the most part, effort. So we are all grateful for your time and energy spent. Any questions for Alex on Plow the Sidewalks?
I'll take that.
All right. You were very comprehensive in your update, and it sounds like things are in a good place, and we'll definitely be promoting all those opportunities to make sure this thing really passes and makes its way through. So stay tuned, everyone. And I'm just going to go ahead and also drop the Better Street Chicago donate link as well. So feel free to do.
Yeah, thank you for dropping that. And also just to give a question that was asked of John about how we can prevent or how we can advocate for bike lanes and safe streets infrastructure on the south side without looking like a bunch of gentrifiers. I want to uplift the Better Street Chicago Action Fund, which is our political arm that does endorsements and then canvassing. We have experienced a lot of really positive headway when we show up on the south side and actually door knock and participate in community engagement. And when we don't only we don't only rear our heads when we're, signing a petition or demanding something of the alder. So this go around, we're exclusively making endorsements on the state house and state Senate levels, but we are in the midst of that process. We'd love any support. And again, as I said, it's a really, really great way to show up in these communities. And you can get a sense for the infrastructure they have down there. I was door knocking for Julio Ramirez, who's the 12th Ward Alder last winter, and I got to see the state of their sidewalks and take photos of what the uncleared sidewalks look like down there. So, that is one, it's not a cure-all, and I'm not going to be someone who's going to say the only way to get these things is through electoral work, but it is a really, really great way to build relationships with folks whose neighborhoods you may not live in and really create those connections so that we can start to advocate for our safe streets infrastructure and our voices will actually be heard.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Alex. We really appreciate you taking the time out to be here.
Thank you.
All right. All right. I am going to now hand it over to my colleague, Alex Perez, to share some committee updates.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And thanks, John, for mentioning me on the interview with the Dickens Greenway. So kind of piggybacking off of what John had mentioned with the Safe Streets projects that have been built out this year and the progress that CDOT has been doing in 2023. It's also how do we keep the momentum going in the future years with the possibility of funding not being there or not much funding being there for the coming years. So it's also engaging residents and people who live in communities to also advocate to their aldermen, to see that, or whenever you go to these community meetings for safe street projects or bike lane projects, to make sure that you're also advocating for a revenue stream for these projects to be built out. So the projects that John were mentioned were pretty much built out thanks to the Chicago Works Capital Plan project that was put out under the previous administration with Mayor Lori Lightfoot, and that is set to be expired in 2024. So there is kind of a push on our end at Active Trans to get more advocacy to be done with just getting the word out for people to be aware of kind of this issue with possibility of funding. Because right now, the way some of the funding sources are for these projects, or previously the way they were sourced, especially for bike projects, was through automatic menu money, and that oftentimes is very limited or competes with other projects. So a lot of the times these projects don't get built out, and it also relies on the alderman approval of the project. So if the alderman doesn't approve of a certain safe streets project, that could also just disinvest of the network in itself. And that's another thing that John was mentioning, is how do we build out this network of a bike lane network that is missing, because what people are doing is getting from kind of neighborhood to neighborhood space, and it's also kind of taking away the concentration of just focusing on downtown, and also focusing on other communities on other sides of the neighborhood that are lacking either some bike lanes, or definitely lacking the need of protected bike lanes in their neighborhood to keep people safe. So that's kind of putting it the big picture together of what John was talking about with some of the safe street projects that we've seen, especially those with protected bike lanes and curb bump outs that also improve the infrastructure for pedestrians with shortening the crosswalks or making drivers slow down. Those are all very important to be replicated across the city, and with also kind of just encouraging your aldermen to look at some of the safe street projects that have been done in other neighborhoods and to take the same approach on their ward as well. And kind of going off of that is just tying it into the big picture of whenever you go to a meeting at your alderman or a CDOT meeting, the Chicago Mobility Collaborative has also continued to advocate for how CDOT is continuing to fund projects in the future, because that is one thing that we want to see the momentum for going to 2024 and 2025 is more projects get built out and quicker, not the opposite.
Great. Any questions for Alex about the Capital Works Fund? This is definitely something we're going to be watchdogging through the end of the year, like Alex said, to make sure it is renewed, because it's been so crucial to getting all this great new infrastructure built.
Happy to take any questions. And then one thing to mention too, at the start of the year, there was a committee on the pedestrian safety committee that was put on to have a hearing on the Chicago cycling strategy, and CDOT was there. So I was present, as long as other Safe Street advocates, to testify. And one of the things that I mentioned was the need for renewing this Capital Works Fund for CDOT to continue doing the good work that they are doing.
All right. Well, if nobody has any questions. Oh,
I have a question, actually.
Yeah.
So can you think of anything that Street Squad could be doing to advocate for renewing the funding for the protected bike lanes and other bikeways in terms of renewing this fund? Alex?
Can you say that again?
Like what tact do you think Streets Blog could be taking to help encourage renewing the fund for bike infrastructure?
I mean, one of the things that would be helpful is kind of any upcoming meetings that either CDOT or Alderman is putting together, just making sure that whenever you are letting people aware of it, it's also kind of mentioning the need for the funding as being part of the conversation, because oftentimes whenever a meeting does happen, it's always about infrastructure, and generally the funding is always kind of left out, or the funding is never really brought into the equation of the project moving forward. So that's one thing that we like to do, is just put it out there and then making sure that other people can run with it as well too.
Okay, thanks. We'll try to do that.
We have a couple questions or comments and question in the chat. Part of the controversy about the Dickens Greenway was around funding, and it turns out the funding came from Divvy. Do we know how much money has been coming from Divvy and what other projects it has helped fund?
Go for it, John. It looks like you know the answer.
Yeah, I can answer that precisely. So although there was a neighborhood newspaper that incorrectly reported that the funding had been shifted from federal congestion mitigation and air quality funding to Chicago taxpayer funds. And there was recently an NBC TV report that said the money had been shifted to city funds. After we made a fuss about that, NBC ran a print report that acknowledged that the greenways were funded by Divvy revenue, Divvy bike share revenue. So this was not Chicago taxpayer money. This was money that came from Divvy users, either Chicagoans or people from like Berlin who were visiting Chicago. So that's a completely fair way to fund bikeways, is charge the people who are using Divvy to pay for the infrastructure they're using. And so that was $910,000, less than $1 million, to fund the Dickens Greenway. And it runs 1.4 miles from Clybourne to the Lincoln Park Zoo. So I think it's a bargain. It not only has the bike lanes, it has speed humps, sidewalk bump outs, and raised crosswalks. And they also lowered the speed limit from 30 to 20. So it just has all kinds of safety benefits for all road users. It's not just for bicyclists.
Great. And then we had a comment here, Ben, saying that Vice Chair Cruz made it seem like at the cycling strategy hearing, they'll be holding a divvy specific hearing later this year. So let's all stay tuned for that once that's announced. All right. If there are no other questions for Alex, oh, was there one more? Oh, when is the divvy contract up for renewal? Can we push for more subsidies to make fares cheaper?
The contract agreement is going to be going on for quite a while. It was about 4 years ago, they signed a 9-year contract extension. And part of that agreement was that Lyft has the right to raise the price of divvy a certain amount every year. I think it might have been 10%. But yeah, divvy is costing about $150 a year for members now. Now, it's worth noting it's still only $5 for lower income residents to get the divvy for everyone pass, which I think nowadays, I know nowadays is still only $5. That is a bargain. Like for basically the price of 2 CTA rides, you can use divvy blue bikes as much as you want. And they have increased the number of blue bikes, so it's not just electric bikes being added to the system. But yeah, $150 a year. I think for a lot of Chicagoans, that's still a bargain. But we're going to be publishing an article by Cameron Bolton. As soon as I get off this meeting, I'm going to start editing it about how that does raise some issues. What if you make less than say 35,000, I think it is, you can get divvy for everyone passes memberships for $5. And if you've got a job that pays a middle class wage, you can probably afford $150 a year for bike share. But if you're somewhere in the middle, if you're a working class person who makes more than $35,000 a year, that might seem a little outside your budget to spend $150 a year on a bike share membership. So we're going to address that and see if there's much that can be done about that at this point.
Great. All right. Thanks for all the great questions and lively dialogue, folks. We are just about 11 minutes out from the end of our hour. So I'm going to barrel through some quick transit updates, and then I want to try to save at least 5 minutes or so for updates from you all, whether your groups are participating in anything or if you have any more questions. So let's see here. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware that CTA and CDOT published their Better Streets for Buses plan at the end of last year. I'm going to drop the link to that in the chat. So what this does is set a group of 17 corridors that they identified, some of the highest ridership CTA routes, where they are looking to implement a proposed toolkit of bus priority street improvements. So that could be anything from better bus stops, bus lanes, transit signal priority, which is when you can upgrade a traffic light and the bus for an operator to either hold a green light longer to get through it, or trigger a green light to keep it more reliable and on its schedule. It can also include things like bus bulbs, so where there's kind of a jut out of the sidewalk so that people can board more seamlessly, also helping keep the bus more reliable and on its schedule. So we're really excited about this toolkit, but it's all going to be about the implementation. And we're really hoping to see leadership from the mayor's office in working to implement this. We know CTA and CDOT are working on some feasibility studies this year using some Invest in Cook funds. So they're going to select a couple key corridors. And so we'll keep you posted as that work progresses and as there are opportunities to get involved. But as we talked about in November, there's a lot at stake for our region's transit system in the coming year or so with the fiscal cliff, the funding crisis that we're facing. So there's going to be a lot of work and a lot of energy needed down in Springfield advocating for additional revenue for transit, as well as governance reform to make sure that we have a modernized, efficient transit system that really is able to serve the needs of our region in the year 2024 and not say the 80s. So kind of the umbrella of this work for us will be under our Transit That Works campaign, the fiscal cliff work we're calling our Save Transit work, and then this kind of Better Streets for Buses and operations advocacy to get hiring kind of up to snuff and service to pre-pandemic levels, like our peer cities have managed to do, but we're still struggling to do. That is all under the umbrella of transforming transit. So stay tuned for ways to get involved there. In case you haven't seen the full report that the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning did on the kind of fiscal crisis. I'm gonna drop that in the chat as well. It's pretty technical and kind of overly detailed for the average consumer, but if you're interested in getting in the weeds, feel free to dive into that as well. Let's see here. So we also wanted to share that the RTA, so the RTA that oversees CTA, PACE, and Metra, is seeking new advisory board members. So they currently have vacancies for representatives from DuPage, Kane, Lake, and Will counties, as well as the city of Chicago. So there will be compensation up to $400 per meeting, and they meet on a quarterly basis. They are looking to recruit folks by their February meeting. So if you're interested or know folks in DuPage, Kane, Lake, or Will counties, they can email, gosh, I think it was communications@rtachicago.org. Let me grab that in just a moment and I'll drop that in the chat. If you're interested in, being more involved in our regional transit system, as we've said, there's so much at stake. So it's a really key pivotal time to get involved. And we think that yeah, that's the email you would indicate your interest to. Please do go for it. And let us know if we can support you in those efforts. Let's see, what else did we have? We also wanted to make sure you guys were aware there were some exciting announcements from Metra this week. Bikes are now allowed on all trains, and they have expanded their reduced fare program for SNAP recipients. So that's pretty exciting to see Metra doing great work to make their service more accessible and multimodal friendly. For those of you who participated in the, oh, they just closed on Monday, shoot. Okay, well, sorry about that. It sounds like the RTA advisory board applications closed on Monday. I was not aware. All right, thanks, Nick, for that update. Sorry for the false hope, everybody. What else? We also, for those of you who participated in our action alerts around the 2024 CTA budget, we want to share the response we got from CTA. Most likely all of you did as well, where they committed to doubling their hiring over the course of 2024. So we were pleased to see that sort of public response. And we know that will go a long way to help work to restore service levels. And now it's going to be about kind of monitoring and watchdogging to make sure they follow through on that commitment to double their hiring. So stay tuned for updates on that as we remain both hopeful and watchful, I guess. And then we are still working on details, but we have a transit town hall event that will likely be happening at the end of February. So we just wanted to tease that, where we'll be kind of honoring Rosa Parks's legacy. There's the National Transit Equity Day that usually falls on her birthday on February 4th. But we'll be planning something for towards the end of the month, along with partners from the Transportation Equity Network. And hope to have some elected officials, transit riders sharing their stories, etc. So stay tuned for that. And then we wanted to plug our upcoming street team advocate trainings. We have about 5 slots left on January 25th, which will be in person at our office in the Loop, and then virtually on February 7th, unlimited spots there. This is the sign up link. And so if you're interested in kind of leveling up your advocacy, getting more involved in our key campaigns, Safe Streets for All and Transit That Works, that is the place to do so. You can connect with kind of fellow leaders, with both in the city and the region, and yeah, just expand your knowledge and leadership potential in this space. So that is it from me. Oh, sorry, one more. There is a public meeting next week on the 25th, I believe. This is going to be about Chicago Avenue Bridge, and this is a key transit corridor, a key bus route corridor. So this will be focusing on the viaduct at Chicago and Halsted as well. I'm just going to copy and paste these details and post them in the chat. But if folks are able to attend, it would be good to have some kind of pro-bus support in the room. Oh, looks like Michael just posted those details on my behalf. So sorry, that was a lot to throw out in such a short period of time. We're kind of running tight on time, but do other folks in the virtual room have updates to share, or feel free to drop them in the chat? You can raise your hand or come off mute. We know there's a lot of good stuff cooking up for the year to come. So lots of different ways to get involved. All right, well, oh, great. There's a calendar event. You can RSVP to be reminded of the Chicago Avenue Bridge meeting. That will be on January 23rd from 5 to 7 at the Eckhart Field House.
I'm willing to wager that if we get enough people to show up for that meeting, we can get good bus service to Bally's Casino.
Top priority. Very good. All right, well, we're at the hour. So thank you so much, folks, for sticking with us through all these updates. Thank you to our guest speakers, John and Alex, and for being part of this movement. We need each and every one of you. So we really appreciate it. The next one of these calls will have, I believe it's March 9th, the first Friday in March from noon to 1 as well. As always, if you have any feedback on this format or any suggestions for guest speakers or topics, you can email me at julia@activetrans.org. And hope you all have a warm, pleasant rest of your weekends. Take care, everybody.